Chapter 11. Tell Your Story. There's no rush, Victor. Take your time, Mrs. Garrison said in a reassuring voice. Victor explained to Mrs. Garrison, and me, I guess, what led up to today's episode at the buddy bench. And the more we sat there listening, the more emotion you could see on Mrs. Garrison's face. She usually has a pretty good poker face, but something about what Victor was telling her kept her from hiding it today. You see, Victor had told Mrs. Garrison that when he was a baby, his dad left him and his mom, and that until he was in second grade, his mom was a single mother. That's when she had met Jack. Jack was a great guy to Victor. Jack would buy Victor things and take him places. He would do all the right things, all the great things you see on television and in the movies. Victor's mom fell in love with him, and so did Victor. The first time Victor's mom told him that Jack was going to babysit him because she had to take on a double shift, Victor was so excited. He couldn't believe that he was going to have this great guy, who might be his dad someday, all to himself. He had even planned out the entire night, games and toys and pillow forts. You know, everything a 7-year-old would like. But as soon as Jack picked him up from school, Victor knew that something was wrong. Jack didn't have that same smile on his face when Victor got in the car. And when Victor started to tell Jack all about the plans he had made, Jack turned up the volume on the radio. Then, when Victor handed him the paper with all the plans he had written down, Jack crumpled it up and threw it out the window. Victor knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't the Jack that he knew. Usually, Victor's mom would take him straight home and feed him a snack before helping him with his homework. Then they would cuddle on the couch and watch Victor's favorite show. Jack didn't do any of that. Jack drove him to a neighborhood that he didn't recognize, where the streets were narrow and the houses were almost touching each other. They stopped outside a house, and Jack told him to stay in the car while he went inside and talked to a friend. While he waited, Victor noticed something strange. There were no kids outside. Back at home, there were always kids playing outside. Then Victor noticed something even more strange. Someone had thrown their shoes onto the electrical line. Why would they do that? They still look brand new. If Victor ever wasted a new pair of shoes like that, he knew he would be in big trouble with his mom. When Jack finally came back, Victor asked him about the shoes, but Jack told him don't worry about it. Then they visited a few more of Jack's friends' houses. Each time, Victor had to wait in the car. Eventually, he fell asleep from boredom. When he woke up, he was at home. Sort of. He was in front of his house, still in Jack's car. He took his backpack and tried to get inside, but the door was locked. After knocking and ringing the doorbell for a few moments with no answer, Victor had gotten scared. He sat down on one of the chairs of his porch, and just like any scared kid would do, Victor started to cry. Jack finally opened the door and ordered Victor to get inside before anyone noticed that he was outside alone. When Victor asked for a snack, Jack told him to get one himself. When Victor asked Jack for help with his homework, Jack told him that he didn't have time to help any kid. That if Victor was as smart as his mother claimed he was, then he could do it by himself. So he did. When he had finished his homework, Victor decided he would still try and do some of the things he had written on his list. First was play with action figures from his favorite television show. When he asked Jack, Jack asked him if he was 5 years old. Victor reminded him that he was 7.5. Jack asked him what they were supposed to do with his toys. Victor explained that they would make believe that they were alive. You know, play pretend, Victor had told him. Jack said that it was dumb and unrealistic and not worth his time. Jack finished it up with, "You need to take your heads out of the clouds and grow up." Victor was hurt and decided that he wasn't going to try anything else he had written on his list. Instead, Victor asked if he could watch his favorite television show since he was done with his homework, like he normally would, but Jack wouldn't let him. He said he was watching an important game. "Go and do something in your room," Jack had ordered him. This was not what Victor had expected. There had been no games, no toys, no pillow forts. Jack was being a completely different person. That was until his mother came home. You see, Jack had ordered pizza for dinner, and Victor was in the middle of his second slice when he heard his mother's car pull up in the driveway. Jack had quickly asked Victor what his favorite television channel was and changed it as fast as he could. He then picked up He then picked Victor up, pizza and all, sat Victor down beside him, and then put his arm around his shoulders. And he did it all before Victor's mom could come through the front door. When Victor's mom had asked that everything had gone, Jack had done all the talking. Jack told his mother that he had helped Victor with his homework, that they had played together, and that he'd even let Victor choose dinner. Of course, it had all been a lie. And when Victor's mom went to the restroom, Jack pulled Victor in close and told him that if he ever told his mom what really happened, that she wouldn't believe him, because who would she believe, an adult or a kid? But Victor didn't give up on Jack right away. He figured that maybe he was just having a bad day. So the next time Jack had to babysit Victor, Victor decided to give it a second try. He wouldn't ask Jack to play make-believe. Instead, he asked if Jack would take him to the mall. His friends at school had told him all about this new arcade they had built in there. It was the first arcade in the entire city. Once again, Jack shot down his idea. When Victor told Jack that his mom wouldn't take him because she didn't have the money, and that he had been saving up his allowance so that Jack wouldn't have to pay for anything, Jack still denied his request. But Victor didn't give up. He really wanted to go to the arcade, so he ran to his room and came back with all the money he had saved up and even offered to pay for Jack to play. The money seemed to get Jack's attention. He took it from Victor and told him that he would hold on to it so that Victor wouldn't spend it too quickly. The next thing he knew, he and Jack were on their way to the mall. At least, that's what he thought. After a few minutes in the car, Victor noticed that they were going the wrong way. When he told Jack, Jack told him that they were going somewhere more important. When Victor reminded him that the arcade was important to him, Jack told him that video games are for people with little minds, and that Victor would thank him when he was older. Instead of going to the arcade, they ended up at the house with the shoes on the electrical line. Victor never got his allowance of money back. Once again, Victor decided not to give up. When Jack had to watch Victor again, Victor decided to try something completely different. Victor had noticed that Jack was always watching soccer games on television. He would get so angry and yell at the television when his team was doing badly. He would also get excited and cheer at the top of his lungs when they scored. Sometimes when they scored, he would even lift Victor up high and spin him around the room. So Victor decided to learn how to play soccer. Victor would play soccer at every recess. He wanted to be the best that he could be. He figured that if he could get good at soccer, that maybe, just maybe, he could get on Jack's good side. He had run out of other ideas. It was this or nothing. Luckily, his chance to impress Jack came sooner than he thought. After he finished his homework, he went to his room and changed into the soccer jersey his mom had just bought him. It was a jersey of Jack's favorite team. Then he grabbed a soccer ball and rushed to the living room where Jack was watching soccer. Victor asked Jack if he wanted to play soccer with him. Jack told him to get out of the way. He couldn't see the game. So Victor moved aside and asked Jack again. Jack didn't answer. Victor stepped a little closer to Jack and asked again. And again, Jack said nothing. Finally, Victor stood right next to Jack and asked with a huge smile on his face if Jack wanted to go outside and play soccer. "Go play with yourself," Jack had shouted while backhanding Victor away from him. Victor explained how he had spent every recess learning how to play soccer so that he could have something in common. He even told Jack that not only was he the smartest kid in his grade, but that he had now become the best soccer player in his grade. Without taking his eyes off the television, Jack told Victor that sports don't prove your intelligence or how successful you'll be in life. For the next 2 years, it was the same thing. As long as Victor's mom was there, Jack was every single mother's dream. And every time Jack had to babysit Victor, he was the complete opposite. That was until Victor and his mother moved in with Jack. Jack had gotten a promotion at work and told Victor's mom that they should move in together. He told her that with his raise, he would be able to cover the rent and the bills, that she wouldn't have to work double shifts anymore, and that any money she made would be all hers to spend however she wanted. Victor's mom had liked the idea, but told Jack that she wanted to wait until the end of the month, though, so that she could notify the landlord and so that she didn't lose out on any money she had already paid. Jack had agreed that it was a smart idea. After moving in with Jack, things had only gotten worse between him and Victor. It had given Jack more time with Victor. That meant more time alone with Victor. Victor basically became Jack's slave, even when his mother was around. But he always tried to make it look like, and sound like he was just playing. "We're just bonding," Jack would say. Of course, Victor's mom didn't see what happened when it was just Victor and Jack. Not only that, they never stayed in one place for more than a few months. And anytime Victor would whine or do something Jack didn't like, Jack would just push or smack Victor. At first, it didn't hurt that much, and it usually didn't leave any marks. But the longer they lived with him, the stronger the shoves and hits became. And it wasn't just the physical attacks. Jack would also say the meanest things to Victor, like tell him that he was dumb, or that he would never grow up to be anything important, and that Victor would never be as successful as Jack was. One time, when Victor asked why Jack was so mean to him, Jack told him, "Because no one likes you." And when Victor pointed out that he had lots of friends, Jack told him, "Those aren't your friends. They only pretend to be your friends because they feel sorry for you." This last statement had caused Victor's voice to get all shaky. Mrs. Garrison placed her hand on Victor's knee, but didn't say anything. Victor took a deep breath and sighed before continuing to tell his story. About a month ago, Jack had told Victor's mom that he had a friend in the realty business who had found them a house for cheap. "It's a deal we can't pass up," he had said. And his mother thought about it. Jack had gotten onto one knee and proposed to her. After that, Victor's mom agreed to not only marry Jack, but to move here with him. It was Victor's worst nightmare. He had recently thought about telling his mom about how Jack wasn't really the great guy she thought he was, but now it was too late. Jack had even given Victor a fake hug just so that he could tell him, "Don't you dare ruin your Mother's Day." And later that night, as he offered to tuck Victor in for bed, he reminded Victor that nobody believes what a kid has to say over an adult. Mrs. Garrison assured Victor that she believed everything he was telling her. I just sat there in awe and disbelief. I had never heard anything like this. I had never even seen anything like it on television or in the movies. Mrs. Garrison then asked if Jack had hit Victor recently. Victor didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and turned his back to Mrs. Garrison. "Victor?" she called. Still nothing. Mrs. Garrison couldn't see it, but I could. Victor's eyes were filling up with tears, but this time he wasn't covering his face. As I stood up to place my hand on his shoulder, he shrank away before I could touch him. He then did something I didn't see coming. With his back now facing both of us, Victor lifted his shirt, slowly, and the higher he raised it, the more terrified I became. Victor's back was covered in bruises. Some were thin lines, some were round, some were lighter, while others were darker. But it was the darkest one that scared me the most. Not only was it the darkest, it was also the biggest, and it was in the shape of a hand, an adult-sized hand. Now I knew why Victor had shrank away like I did when I have a sunburn. Then I began to tear up. How could anyone do this to another person? How could anyone do this to a kid? Mrs. Garrison, whose eyes were also filled with tears, slowly and gently pulled Victor's shirt down so that it was back to normal. She then turned Victor around and gave him the biggest, gentlest hug she could. Then Victor did another thing I had never seen him do. He hugged her back.